Just since 2020, billionaire wealth is up 88%. The unfortunate truth about COVID policies, it ended up in the end being probably the second biggest transfer of wealth from poor people to rich people since the bank bailout under Obama. We went through a pandemic. You and I were struggling. Sure, we got a couple nice handout checks. Does anybody think that $1,400 here or $1,800 there from the government, whatever those checks were, comes anywhere close to beating 88% billionaire wealth growth?
No.
No shot in the world.
Could you say that that's from inflation or literally just wealth siphoning?
It's wealth siphoning. It's 100% wealth siphoning. At the turn of the decade, in 2020, the top 10 billionaires only had one guy who had a net worth over $100 billion. That was Bezos. Now all 10 of them do. And the biggest problem is the stock market. Right now, the richest 1% own 54% of all stocks. That's up from 40% in 2002. The idea of the stock market is that we're all supposed to participate, right? You can grow your wealth two ways. You can either get invested, get into the stock market, get ownership, or you can own property. Houses, other things, property. You got to own something to grow your wealth. That's what it means to grow wealth. You have to grow your assets. We're heading towards a scenario, if this keeps going, where average people don't get to own stock.
People argue, well, if you gave money to people, they wouldn't become entrepreneurial. Dude, how entrepreneurial can you be when you can't afford anything? When you can't afford a single downturn? That's very anti-entrepreneurial, if you ask me.
First thing I would do is entrepreneurial. And that's a lot of people. There's a lot of people who have the thing they want to do that currently feel like they can't do it. We have actually crushed the entrepreneurial spirit because of the way modern economics is running. We've never produced less innovation. We've never produced less genuinely new things as we do right now. We have a lot of novelties. It's not real innovation. We're not making like real progress. Now that everything's owned, all property, like there is no place where you can just go start something from scratch. You have to start by asking others to share their resources with you.
A lot of people will say that I have what I have because I work for it, I have it, it's mine. It would be unfair for you to take it away from me.
This is the best analogy I've heard for it. There's a guy on an island and he's there for the first 10 years of his life and he's by himself, and so he works really hard. He gathers all the coconuts, he creates a way to repeatedly fish, he creates a sustainable life, builds a homestead, finds a plot of land, and he thinks he's alone. And for 10 years he is. And so he works really hard for all that stuff. And then a second person lands on the island and comes along. All right, I'm hungry. Here's a coconut. Grabs it out of the tree. And the first guy sees him. Hey, that's my coconut. I was here first. I own all this land. If you want that, you've got to work for me. Most of us can easily recognize that that's not really a justified situation, but that's more or less how our economy works. We're more or less telling people everything's already owned, and if you want any of this stuff, you've got to get it from the people who already own it. Why do they own it? Because they were there first? Because their daddy owned it? It's not really clear to anybody on the outside. They don't have any real justification. For a total stranger, some people will look me dead in the face when I make that analogy and they'll be like, I don't see what's wrong with that. The analogy flips when you make it a human being that you care about. Because if I tell you that that's your sister, what do you think you should give your sister to make sure that she can get by on this island?
You would probably say, well, I'd share with my sister. I would share more. Like the island would be ours together.
Because it is. We have to see all of ourselves as brother and sister sharing the resources of this planet. It's us against the planet. It's not us against each other. But that's what capitalism has done to us. It pits us against each other, iron versus iron. It is a sword fight of who can exploit the other one the most. Because fundamentally, that's exploitative. You don't have a justified property claim to all of that land on the island. You just got lucky.
Yeah, just because you were born first. It just came down to a dice roll.
Bingo.
Johnny, welcome back to episode 4. Finally, we got a really good topic today, and this is the topic that kind of inspired us to start the podcast, because it came from a conversation where I had previously held a pretty staunch belief opposite to what you believed, and through talking about this and just kind of inquiring what you thought, it's actually moved my beliefs pretty far from where they originally began. And that was honestly the inspiration for this, of if we can just communicate ideas very well, then we have a good chance of actually helping people understand why these ideas can benefit us more than previously held ideas. So the way we the way this started yesterday as well. You and I we were having a conversation about what were some of the issues that were affecting our society as a whole, but also people individually. We were talking about things that were making us, physically sick and mental health sickness and illness. And I was bringing up that toxins in our environment could have been a pretty big issue that, pointed to causing these things with physical sickness and mental health illness. And as I was talking about that, you pointed out that you asked me, Royal, do you think that's the first cause of this, or do you think there's an underlying cause causing these toxins in the environment and causing these harmful practices we have in society? You basically asked me, do you think that's the biggest problem we have right now? I'm like, I think it's a pretty big problem. You're like, well, I think there's something bigger. I think something's causing these things. And I asked you, what's the underlying cause of all this? And what did you say?
It's unchecked capitalism. Everything that happens in our environment that's perceived as a negative, I genuinely believe so much of it comes from when people have profit as their only goal. They're willing to justify all kinds of things, and we'll get more into that, but that's the main thing. It's unchecked capitalism with no regulation.
Well, that's a good podcast. I think we just wrap it up here. And
yeah, that's it, guys. That's the whole point.
Go ahead.
No facts, no data, just conjecture.
Just like Socrates did it. The way that you sparked this conversation initially with me a few months ago was you pulled up a stat, and I'm going to read it off right now. I had it written down so I can word it well, but you basically said since 1970, the GDP of America has doubled. And I'm like, okay, I can believe that. That makes sense. But then you followed up saying, however, the relative income for a regular family, adjusted for inflation, has remained the same since 1970.
Right.
And actually, I'll reward that. That's not exactly how it went. You told me that the GDP for the country has gone up double since 1970. And I pushed back. I said, there's no way. There's no way that's possible, because you're telling me that all the people living paycheck to paycheck now have double what people had in 1970, adjusting for inflation. And that's not possible. There's no way. Because that means in 1970, everyone would have been starving to death. But you told me after this, you're like, you're right. That's so true. GDP has doubled. However, relative income, adjusting for inflation for the average family, has stayed the same. And that blew my mind. I said, how's that possible? How can GDP double but our income stays the same? And what did you tell me?
I mean, it's just simply that most of the increase in per capita income is going to the top 1% and the top 10%. There's disproportionate figures there, right? The top 1% is pulling in more even than percentage 2 through 10. But that group of people is getting almost all of the increase, while regular average Americans are seeing none of it.
Wow.
Yeah. And to your point, I think there's a bit of a, it doesn't seem like it some days. Because, well, a lot of people are fine. They're doing fine, right? Mm-hmm. It seems like they're doing fine. But there's a bit of a frog in the boiling pot effect happening. And that's where you have to be able to parse the data and understand this picture on a bigger scale. So it's funny that you started this way too, because I had a conversation it's a few years back now, where a friend of mine, a typical social liberal, right? Somebody in the LGBTQ community and have all the typical social liberal beliefs that you would expect from somebody who's socially liberal. They are pro-choice, right? Big on LGBTQ rights and race inequality. Like, those are the kind of issues they like to talk about repeatedly.
Yeah.
And what I brought up, you know, do you realize how much negative impact is happening on the LGBTQ community because of wealth inequality, not because of just, it's easy to look at the president and be like, you should do different laws. It's easy to look at Congress and be like, why is it like this? It should be like this. And you can talk about that and be passionate about it, and that's great. But if more people just had economic freedom, many of these things wouldn't even require a particular law necessarily to even make that better. They would have that economic mobility to get themselves to a better place. And her response to me, I'll never forget it, was basically like, why is that always what you want to talk about? Economics is boring. Like, I don't like to, like, that's not the kind of politics I like to talk about. I like to talk about the fun stuff because it's fun and easy to talk about social issues and toxins in the environment and conspiracy theories about this thing and Boeing knocking off people left and right, apparently. And, you know, those are the fun things. Economics is dirty.
Because it's so much simpler to point it as a good guy, bad guy narrative than a complex, you know, hard to complete math equation of, man, if we could, you know, distribute money in a different way, people would live their lives a lot better.
Yeah. Well, and even coming to that conclusion, economics is complicated, messy, dirty, massive, too big to wrap your head around. We can't even understand the concept of a billion. That's why there's people on TikTok and YouTube who make those little, like, this is your car in race, and this is how much it would be compared to this Billionaires with. Here's you buying your car. And they do it with, like, grains of rice. And then there's this huge, like, pile of, like, a whole tub full of rice, and then it's, like, taking that one out. That's this billionaire buying a car. And it's because that's the only way we can wrap our head around it. You know? We, like, just saying the numbers, it is hard to wrap your head around. It's not very fun sometimes. But what if? What if it's the biggest problem? And what if it is the first cause that causes most of our other societal issues? And that's what we can explore right now.
Interesting. I think let's play devil's advocate at the beginning here. I think anybody who hears that GDP for the country has doubled, but income adjusted for inflation has stayed the same for the bottom 90% of Americans, anybody can easily agree that that's bad, that's not good. That's hard to justify. The only devil's advocate I would say to that is people would say, how's that true? Is that actually true? Can you prove that? And I guess I don't know what the actual devil's advocate argument would be of why that would be good either. Like, that'd be a hard to justify.
I can give you the one I hear most often.
Okay.
The one I hear most often is that all boats are rising. Because that's sort of somewhat true, right? As overall economic access gets better. I've heard Ben Shapiro make the point a couple of times where he's like, well, yeah, but you didn't have an iPhone in 1970, and you didn't have this, and you didn't have that. Okay, fair enough, man.
Okay.
Sure, we have a few nicer things. Technology has gotten better. That's not really the point. If per capita income has doubled since 1970, I should be able to consume the same and work half as much, or work the same and consume double what I used to. And I can't do that, period. And that's like the frog in the boiling water pot. It just seems like, oh, sure, we have some nicer things. Everyone's got a nicer television set. You know, everyone's got an iPhone and access to some better technology. Okay. But what could I have had if things were balanced and things were fair that I'm currently being held out of?
Go ahead.
And there's some there's some that's hard to parse. It's hard to really know.
I think it's funny that that's an argument used by them, or like someone like Ben Shapiro or whatever, because you having an iPhone doesn't feed you. It doesn't protect you from financial ruin. It doesn't protect your family from going hungry. Because at the end of the day, I see homeless people with iPhones, and that's not changing their life in any really good way. So just because we have better washer and dryers and amenities doesn't mean that life is actually better. I'd argue there's many people out there who had a in other times, other countries, or anywhere, that had a stable income, a predictable income. They had a secured future, per se, where they knew they had a really just good shot. And they are arguably 10 times happier, healthier than someone who is paycheck to paycheck but has an iPhone and a fridge with a screen on it.
Right. And there's more stats. There's more stats that make this picture even bleaker, because it's not just about average Americans. It's what do we define as fair, and how does that look? Because the per capita income, having all of that wealth growth go to the top 10% is a huge problem. But just how big of a problem is it? Just since 2020, billionaire wealth is up 88%. We went through a pandemic. Oh, God. You and I were struggling. Sure, we got a couple nice handout checks. Does anybody think that $1,400 here or $1,800 there from the government, whatever those checks were, any comes anywhere close to beating 88% billionaire wealth growth?
No.
No shot in the world. At the turn of the decade, in 2020, the top 10 billionaires only had one guy who had a net worth over $100 billion. That was Bezos. Now all 10 of them do.
Could you say that that's from inflation or literally just wealth siphoning?
It's wealth siphoning. It's 100% wealth siphoning. They took advantage of the unfortunate truth about COVID policies was that it ended up in the end being probably the second biggest transfer of wealth from poor people to rich people since the bank bailout under Obama.
Wow.
And that's just in the last 4 years. I mean, you go back to 1970, right? There was a time when the poorest person on the Forbes richest 400 list had a net worth of $220 million. Now to get into that club, you have to have $2.77 billion.
Wow.
So that's going from 82 to 2022. In 40 years, the richest 400 people in our country have just absolutely exploded, and the average member of the Forbes 400 has over 10 billion in total wealth, 15 times the 1982 average after adjusting for inflation.
Now,
and the biggest problem is the stock market. Because the idea of the stock market is that we're all supposed to participate, right? You can grow your wealth two ways. You can either get invested, get into the stock market, get ownership, or you can own property. Houses, other things, property. You got to own something to grow your wealth. That's what it means to grow wealth. You have to grow your assets. And right now, the richest 1% own 54% of all stocks. That's up from 40% in 2002. We're heading towards a scenario, if this keeps going, where average people don't get to own stock.
Let me ask you this, because I think it's really easy to paint billionaires as bad guys because they have a lot of money, almost in a classic Disney-esque Robin Hood style of a big fat rich cat on the top of the hill. A common argument I hear is when you say Bezos has 100 billion, Bezos doesn't actually have 100 billion. That's his net worth in terms of he couldn't go and spend $100 billion right now if he wanted to. because that's not liquid money in his bank. That's net worth of all of his business assets, whatever. And frankly, if he did spend that, then I feel like more than $100 billion of business would go, a market would disappear, and that wouldn't help people, or would it? So tell me, how do you address the argument of that's not his liquid money that he can spend if he wanted to?
So 2 ways. Yeah, I don't care if the money's liquid or if it's in his assets. Point is he's got it and other people don't. So that's the most important thing to remember. It's like, okay, sure, he can go turn that into cash. He can do a lot of things because he has it. He can take loans against it. I mean, the average day for Bezos, compared to everybody else in this country, what he could do with the money he has available to him is just unbelievable. He has enough, probably in liquid assets, that you could go take probably about $100 million out of his bank account, and probably he would not notice or experience a single material change in his day-to-day life. I mean, his net worth fluctuates more than 100 million every couple of minutes.
Right.
So, that's the first piece. The second piece is to address the more important issue of, if he took all that business away, what it would do to the economy. I'm not sure he's done anything good for the economy.
Really? Amazon?
I mean, yeah. I mean, if you really think about Amazon and what it's doing for our life, I'm not sure it's a positive on the economy to single-handedly drive retail stores out of business everywhere. And that's what they're doing. And that's a part that is not factored. There could be an argument that that's good to centralize and concentrate that. Maybe retail stores were a bad thing. But if you look at how much Amazon has grown, unfortunately, it's just impossible to measure that against how much retail has collapsed. But we literally have something going on that we call retail Armageddon. Go to a mall. See how it's going.
Mm-hmm.
Go to any local mall. I mean, we have one mall where I live that's doing okay. The rest of them are in shambles. The rest of them are not making money. I, at one point, was a retail store manager in a mall where I was the only store open in an entire circle. The big anchor store had closed. Every other little store around us had closed. And we're just there like, when are we next? It's not good for the workers. It's high stress and anxiety. Retail workers are one of the biggest job sectors in the country. So if all of those people are losing their jobs, Amazon is not employing that many people. And so all that Amazon has really done is concentrated all of the profit that used to get distributed amongst retail workers across America and concentrated in basically one guy's hands. I don't think that's good.
He figured out how to do it for cheaper, charge the same amount, and then pay the workers less and keep the rest for himself.
Yes. And I mean, look, we all use Amazon.
Yeah.
I use it. No like, you can't, when something's that big, you can sit there and be like, you hypocrite. It doesn't really get you anywhere. Because the point is to compete. You're in capitalism too. You've got to be smart economically. You've got to be smart with your time. You've got to be smart with So if Amazon's the best choice for your product, you're just going to use Amazon.
Yeah.
But I do that knowing that I think this is ultimately a net drain on society. I don't think anybody wakes up going, I'm really glad I live in a world with Amazon.
Yeah.
If you really think about it, and you take the cost of what Amazon's doing to us, and all those people who are out of work and their stores are closed and they can't make any money, and all the little shops, I mean, good luck opening a family-owned retail business. There's no shot anymore.
When you say there's no choice but to use Amazon, and people would say, well, you use it because it's the best choice, and because it's the best choice, it has a right to exist. Is that good?
A right to exist. There are markets that we have banned since the dawn of time, and because we agreed that it didn't have a right to exist. And if this one places economics and profit over human beings, then it's in that category. And that includes the slave market. That includes the market over toxic substances, right? There are things that we have massive controls over, massive regulation over, where we decide this is not a market that's good for profit to be a motive for. And like, that's all that people like myself who argue for a much more regulated economy, we're basically just saying there's a lot more things that should fall under the umbrella of maybe profit isn't the right motive for this type of thing. I think that all weapons of war should be in that category. I think that health should be in that category. Well, hey, look, hospitals are nonprofit. Okay. What about the pharmaceuticals and the medical device companies and the insurance companies, right? Like 80% of healthcare is for profit in the United States. You don't get a get out of jail free card by appealing to the nonprofit hospitals.
Makes sense. Okay, let's posit that it is true, that wealth has doubled, but it's all gone to the top 10%, and most of that on the top 10% has gone to the top 1%. What do you do about that? Was it unfair that they got it because they played by the rules of business? Or should they not have gotten it?
Yeah. Are billionaires evil? Damn it. No. They played, for the most part, they played fair. It was our system that allowed for this inequality to happen. I mean, if you're the billionaire that doesn't capitalize and doesn't take an advantage, if you don't become Jeff Bezos, on some level you're an idiot. And like, we should just acknowledge that, right? Because the other guy will. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of arms race is what actually makes capitalism drive production and make things boom sometimes, right? The problem is, again, it's how do we check that against, is there actual human value, an increase in human value going up because of the kind of things we make? What do you do about it? What do you do about it now is a complicated problem. There are lots of different solutions, but the answer that I give that makes conservatives who, may watch this cringe when they first hear it is, like, you straight up have to redistribute this wealth. You have to do it in a fair way. You have to do it in a metered way. You have to do it in a measured way. And you have to respect everybody involved, including the billionaires, because again, they don't deserve to just all of a sudden, hey, you've had your fun, now we're going to take everything away from you and ruin your lives. And I don't think anybody would argue for that, but a lot of people would accuse me of arguing for that. But we have to start creating systems of incentives that claw back that wealth away from them. And you can do that through taxes. You can do that through just growing the bottom up. There's a lot of different ways.
So, and then you tax them, you get wealth from them, and then you redistribute it. You just give it to people.
Yes, there was a long time ago. Now it feels like before 2016, when no one had ever heard of universal basic income as a concept, and then this crazy guy was running for president in 2020 named Andrew Yang, who wrote a book, The War on Normal People, which was also based on a book called Raising the Floor. And these are books that argue for a universal basic income. It's the idea that the government would give a basic check to everyone for their basic needs, set that, somewhere around the poverty line, and then we could play capitalism with the excesses of life. But let's at least guarantee a minimum standard of living to everyone. We live in the richest country on earth. We should be able to at least do that, right? Well, the funny part is the number one criticism of Andrew Yang at that time was, look, the government can't just send a check to everybody. And then like a year later, COVID happened, and the government was like, we're going to send everybody a check.
Oh my God.
So clearly we can.
Yeah, and then something happens on the other side of the world, and we can just send checks there too.
Yeah, yeah. The one thing our government is wildly efficient at doing, this is an Andrew Yang quote, the one thing they do very, very well is send large numbers of checks to large numbers of people.
Yeah. To be fair, though, but that was like, for COVID, that was a 1 or 2 time thing. But
Yeah.
Andrew Yang, doesn't he propose to do it on regular? Monthly?
Yeah, his original proposal was $1,000 a month, every month, for every citizen. I think that figure's too low. And people look at me like, well, like 1,000 was already crazy. 1,000 is too low.
I mean,
Without
that makes
question.
sense. It does.
Rent's over 1,000 for most people. So
What my pushback is to this is there's 2 things. I think one is easier answered than other, but the first one is we're such a liberal pipe dream of saying we're just going to give people money, and then the conservatives will say like, what are you just going to imagine the money and give it to them? Is you going to make it out of thin air? But first one is, where do we get the money to give people?
Yeah.
Second thing is, I think people's biggest criticism of welfare is it creates a welfare state. And it creates people who are dependent on welfare. And there's a stereotype of a person who is a welfare abuser and just is using money from the government and being lazy and degenerate. And how does giving people money actually just fix the problem of what they have?
that's a big start.
Or does it just allow them to, does it just enable them?
Yeah. So I'm going to break down your question into 2 different kind of categories.
Please.
Number 1 is, do we have the money and could we extract it if we had it?
Okay.
Okay. So that's kind of your first question. I'm going to leave that one second because I want to address this next one that you brought up.
Would it be easier to
actually think
assume
it's-
that yes, we do, as we explain it?
I have numbers.
Okay.
So we'll get there.
Okay.
We'll get there. The next part though about the incentive, I want to linger on this for a minute because everyone always brings up the work incentive. Like, would this just enable people to be lazy? I want you to currently imagine a future where the self-driving trucks go live on the roads.
Okay.
Okay, the self-driving trucks now work. They're great. They're efficient. We just saved the economy tons of money in labor. The environment's better because they're all electric thanks to our Lord and Savior Elon Musk.
Right.
And, you know, the everything's great. Peachy keen. Except for the 3 million truckers. And not just the 3 million truckers. The hotel workers that, you know, rely on the truck stop workers that rely on the trucker getting out and having a meal and staying the night.
The gas
All of
station
those
pizza
businesses.
companies.
Yeah. Like, there's a lot of economic disruption there. Does anybody think all 3 million of those truckers are now lazy pieces of shit freeloaders that are going to... No, of course not. These are hardworking, blue-collar guys that have been doing it for 20 years. And I don't think anybody would blink twice at saying, yeah, they deserve something to help them get through this economic disruption that's happening to them. It's a good thing. We want the self-driving trucks. I can't state that enough. There are so many... Like, truck driving is a terrible job. Mm-hmm. It's dangerous. It's bad for your health. Again, the food at those gas stations is not what you want to eat. Like, we could go down the list. But these people are hard workers. And, like, the classic economic textbook would have told you, well, we can educate and retrain them for other jobs. It doesn't happen.
Right.
A lot of the factory workers 20 years ago that lost their jobs when a lot of automation started happening in the factories, most of them fell out of the workforce completely, ended up on disability. You know, some of that disruption leads to depression and suicide. Like, this is a big thing. And there's a human cost that we want the technological advancement, but we've got to deal with that. So then, okay, but then that actually kind of proves your point, Alex, right? Because they took the handouts in a lot of cases rather than worked. They're looking for the freeload. We have two different problems. Number one, why is the question always, where's the incentive to work? Why is the question never, where's the incentive to pay a living wage for the average American job? We never ask that of corporations. We never ask that of our businesses, right? Like, because that's my question. Why do we have to have a minimum wage law? The whole reason a minimum wage law exists is because the incentive is to pay less than that.
Mm-hmm.
Market forces dictate you should pay less than that. So we have to create systems of incentives that actually create jobs that have to offer you enough money to make it worth your while to do the job. You shouldn't have to be under the duress of I'm going to lose my house, my food, and my family if I don't take this job. That's not a fair seat at the negotiating table. They have your ultimate destitution on their end of the negotiating table. And people are like, well, you could take any job. Yeah, but every job knows that you're in this situation.
Yeah.
Every job knows that you're in this position.
And have you ever gone looking for a job? It's hell.
Yeah. And they get to dictate the price of the labor. You don't have a fair seat at the negotiating table. So if you gave everyone money, what would that mean? Well, let's say you made it sufficient enough that someone could pay for their food, their health, and their structure, right? Their domicile.
Mm-hmm.
If my neighbor decides to work 30 hours a week and starts getting a whole bunch of nicer shit than me, I now have a choice to make. I can either go work and above and beyond my basic needs, get some of the amenities of 21st century living. Or I could be lazy. And like, that's the thing, is that system of incentives means I'll go out and I'll take a job, but I'm not just going to take any job. You're going to have to make it worth my while. And it would flip those incentives back in line to where there's definitely still going to be an incentive to work, because it turns out just having an apartment and, you know, a couple $100s a month worth of groceries is not a meaningful life. You want access to other things. We want to work. We want to do things, but we definitely need to redefine work. And what it would also do is start recognizing all of the unpaid labor that has been done for the last 150 years in capitalism. The work that your mom did, raising you and putting meals on the table when you were growing up. Mm-hmm. The work that people do caring for loved ones who are in the later years of life, right? There's so many people who put their life on hold because grandpa needs help now. That unpaid labor is a real human job. Capitalism recognizes it at zero. We got to start paying for those things.
I think, in my words, what you're saying is if people had enough income to live on, they wouldn't go to a job begging and scratching for anything that job will offer them, which is usually very little. They'd instead go to the job with a couple cards in their hand, and they can play a hand instead of just being what the dealer deals them. And they could say, exactly. Hey, I don't need you to pay me, even though $9 an hour sucks. I'm not forced to take that anymore. I can actually go and look for some place that's going to pay me $28 an hour, $15, whatever. All those still are pretty bad, low numbers, but he can't be forced to work for an extremely low wage. He's not destitute.
Yeah, exactly. In Denmark, there is no minimum wage law, but McDonald's pays their workers $20 an hour.
Interesting.
Why? Because they have collective bargaining in virtually every single sector of their economy. They have unions. They have things where the negotiating power has shifted to the workers. And so people want to go work at McDonald's because it's a good enough job. Might not be their favorite, might not be the thing that brings them any meaning, but it's a good enough job that because there's a safety net in place, they'll be fine without it, but it's appealing.
Mm-hmm. So you've brought in two things here. You've brought in, if we pay people money per month, say $1,000 per month, now companies will pay people more because they're not just benefiting off other people's bad situations.
Right.
So there's two streams of more money going to a person, from the government and from businesses. Where's all that money coming from, though? Like,
so
is that just coming out the other end of the person's paycheck and taxes?
two biggest problems with this. Mm-hmm. Number one, the illusion is that the money just has to come from somewhere and then it's gone. The best dollar in the American economy is the dollar of the average American, because it gets spent over and over and over again. That's what creates economic movement, mobility.
Okay.
And that's something that people forget. I now am getting an extra, adjusted for inflation, like especially after COVID, like really this should be at least $1,500 a month. So let's say it's $1,500 because your rent's gone up, your everything's gone up. So $1,500. Okay. So now that I'm good, I've got a spare $500. I'm going to go do that car repair that I never thought about doing before. And then I take that $500 and I go in and I pay the car shop. And then because I did my brakes, the guy who works there also was able to negotiate a higher wage from his employer. They get paid for a lot more brake jobs. There's more demand. Now he takes that $500 and he goes and does something that he's wanted to do for a while, like buy something new or whatever. And that money in normal people's hands gets circulated over and over again. The worst dollars in the American economy is the 80% of wealth that literally just sits in the bank accounts of the wealthiest Americans. It does nothing. It grows, right? It's invested, it's in bonds or whatever, but it just sits there. It's not mobile. So it's not producing economic flourishing. It's just static money. That's the first part. So these dollars, we get a lot of them back.
Let's assume
they create jobs.
Let's assume we remove that money out of the billionaire's bank account. That static money.
Yeah.
To say that we could just remove that, like we removed, I feel like there's something wrong with that argument, because that feels like saying I can just remove a piece out of the Jenga tower and the tower won't collapse. Like, what happens if we actually move that money?
Yeah, I'm not arguing to take that money.
Okay.
I don't actually think a wealth tax is the best plan.
Okay.
I think it's a good option. I think but it's not the best option.
Okay.
I was only doing that to contrast the idea that this money that we'd be giving to everybody, when you give it to normal people, we go and spend it. So it doesn't just disappear. It stays in the economy. It gets recycled over and over again. It creates economic mobility. Okay. How do we get the money? There are two big ways. I personally think a tax on land. And people kind of laugh at first, but hear me out. This comes back to private property rights, and I think I can make this argument if you want to go there. Private property rights are made up, just like all your rights are made up. We declared it, we wrote it down on a piece of paper and had it. Well, the second your country collapses, those rights go away. We have to collectively agree that we have rights, and then we have to protect those rights. Mm-hmm. Property rights is probably one of the shakiest ones, because just the idea that somebody can go put 4 stakes in the ground and say, this is mine and the rest of you have to stay off of it. Okay, what are you giving me in return, buddy? Like, you're putting a imposition on me that I can't do anything with that land. You're taking away potential land that I could share and borrow and use with you. Are you paying me anything in return to do that? Are you doing anything in return? And so the idea of a land tax is it would balance that out from a fairness perspective. If the more land you own, you're going to have to do something productive or economically useful or viable with that land to justify it back to the rest of us.
Makes sense.
And that's how we can extract that through a tax. And you could claw a lot of money that way. The other one...
Does that not exist with property taxes yet?
So we have property taxes, but, let's be honest. Most of the taxes are done in such a way, most of the land in this country is, corporate land now. whether it's a corporate farm or a giant building or a piece of an office building or something like all of the land that's worth money is owned by a corporation. And that's the corporations don't pay it.
You're saying that the 1 acre plots that people have for their house is an insignificant amount.
Comparatively.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair.
Yep. Comparatively.
Okay.
So the flip side to that is all this money moves in our economy. Our economy is $20.5 trillion, or at least that's what it was in like 2019. I think it's up to like 22 trillion or something now.
Okay.
To pay for about a $1,500 UBI, you would need to generate about $5 trillion in tax revenue. Sounds like a big number. If you don't think we have the ability to tax 20% of all the money that moves in a given year in the United States and then redistribute it, you're just not thinking big enough. You're just not having an imagination. One way that you could do this is called a value-added tax, which is a better form of a consumption tax rather than it just being a sales tax. You essentially, let's say you take something out of the earth or mine something out of the earth and you turn it into a raw good, right? Iron. Okay. For when I sell the iron at a profit to the steel mill, that is going to get taxed at that level for all the value that got added to it, the profits that were earned from selling that at like 10%. And then when the steel mill turns it into, I don't know, a car, like whatever, or the parts for a car, right? They go sell it to the car manufacturer, and whatever they get on top of that gets taxed at 10%. And we start taxing the consumption. So we tax the money where it moves and where it moves the most, the raw production of the money. That gets complicated, but what this kind of means is virtually every product in society gets taxed at about 10%. Okay, good.
Okay.
The other thing you could do.
Okay, so you were saying a 10% tax on everything, every single profit made.
Yeah, and I would encourage people to look that up because it's better than a sales tax. It means a lot more. Like the problem with a sales tax is it comes from regular people at a much higher percentage. But when you do it as a value-added tax, it taxes corporations a lot more than regular people.
So my question is, if sales tax is more, if we're extracting literally more money on a sales tax, how does a value-added tax produce more money to give back?
No. So sales tax won't produce more. The criticism of a sales tax is that in terms of as a percentage of your income, it disproportionately comes out of the cost of regular people way more.
Okay.
Right? And a value-added tax, will claw that back from the corporations. Now you could say, well, they'll still translate all those costs back down to the consumer at the end of the day. Well, maybe, but we also just gave all the consumers a lot more buying power and a lot more choices with their dollars.
Yeah, they're not.
So
they're not forced to take the bad hand of the companies dealing it to them.
Exactly, because they're in a better position. Yep. And so all of this is to try and tip the scales back the other way. And the important one that people don't think about, and this is another place where we have the money, we have a lot of the money, is our government's already ridiculously inflated budget in a number of different areas. Number one, on military spending, right? Like we have an insanely huge military budget. It's heading towards $1 trillion a year. We spend 20 times more than the next closest country. I could go down all the list. We don't need to do that. And everybody in the world can see that most of it is wasteful. We can have to do better with the dollars that the government is taking in. Another one is if we're rolling into this new UBI, there are some other cash subsidy programs like direct cash welfare, food assistance, right, that could be rolled into this. Now, if you're going to do that, the number needs to be higher. I don't think you want to take somebody on food stamps and say, well, I'm giving you $1,500 a month now, so you should be fine. I'm taking your food stamps away. That's not right. That's not what we should do.
Yeah.
But if we rolled all that in together, and now let's say it's $2,000, so we roll cash welfare, food welfare into this, and it's $2,000. $2,000's about reasonable for a person of what they need every month to get started. It's not going to get you a nice life, but it will get you, you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Right? And the administration cost of all of those programs is absurdly high. Because what do we have to do? The government has to spend money, time, and energy investigating to make sure you're worthy enough of our handout. That's what it means to have a means-tested welfare program. It says you have to go prove to somebody every so often, and there's got to be multiple workers that get hired for that. And it's a terrible job for them. It doesn't bring them any meaning or joy. They don't want to investigate hardworking people who are just trying to, get their life into a better place and need a handout. They don't want to invade these people's privacies. But that's what we've decided. We think we're justified in doing that. You have to prove to us that you're worthy. And so you could get rid of all of those administration costs.
You're saying if we just removed the people checking the people, it would be just more, because checking people is such a expensive cost, it would be more efficient just to give them the money.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. I don't think that sits very well with the part of people that say, well, you just shouldn't get money if you don't earn it yourself. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
But I'm telling those people that they're going to get the check too, and they deserve it.
Right.
This is because here's the framing. 54% of all stocks are owned by the top 1%. You're not getting your fair ownership in being part of the world's largest economy. You are systematically, by forces outside of your control, being taken away from it. You're being separated from the means of production, separated from the means of ownership. And that's being put upon you. And I'm saying you, as an American citizen, deserves your fair share of the pot of gold that we have in this country. And so does everyone else.
I'm curious what you think of this. I will, if we're going to talk about the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, you know what I mean?
Hold on, somebody hit the Marx button.
Dude, where's it at? I'll use my brother as an example. My brother is a property owner. He owns 4 or 5 houses that he rents to people. He's a landlord. He's 28, and we grew up. I would say we grew up privileged in terms of our parents had enough money to provide every single necessity for us that we needed. Healthcare, food, everything. But however, I would say this: he was never handed, $50,000 to go do something. You know what I mean? Like start a business.
Right.
It wasn't that type of wealth.
He's not like in a Donald Trump position.
Right. A small loan of $1 million. But even in more, we weren't ever like loaned a ton of money to go, okay, now you get to go start a business, and you start from 20 levels higher than most people. So he basically, after moving out, he's on his own. And through working, and he's come to own 4 or 5 houses. He's 28, he's done well. And you could say on paper that he's a millionaire, on paper.
Yeah, he's got the assets. Yeah.
But his life is not like a millionaire. He is, he's budgeting and scraping by almost as if I am right now,
Yeah.
He's got 2 kids, a wife. He just moved. He built a home that he's living in now, and things are tight. He doesn't have play money to go throw out, even though he's on paper a millionaire. And when we look at like saying he's in the top 1%, if we say 50% of people are paycheck to paycheck, compared to them, he's like way above. But he's not that far
He's
from
probably
budget
not
wise.
in the top 1%.
Right, But could you say he's in the top 20%?
Yeah.
Okay. Without selling all of his assets, he's still paycheck to paycheck in terms of the budget is tight every month. What do you if you told him that, hey, we're gonna start paying everyone else $1,000 a month, and people like you who have a lot of money are gonna pay for it, he would be like, that's bullshit.
Well,
that's dumb. I worked for my money. I'm a millionaire because I did everything right, plus a little bit of luck. Don't get me wrong, but why would they get money and I don't?
Two things I'd say to your brother.
Okay.
Number one, you're gonna get this check too.
Okay.
You're gonna get the check too. Everyone gets it. There's no means test. There's no, you make too much money, you don't get it. Does that mean I want to send a check to Jeff Bezos? Yes, it'll remind him that he's an American.
Cool. Okay.
So that's the first part. The second part is the way we tax it. If your brother is, like you say, is coming from this consumption tax, well, guess what? Now, if you do consume a lot and you throw around money and you're paying more of that consumption tax because you're consuming a lot. If you pay less, well, then you're not going to experience those costs. It taxes the money when it moves where the profit is gained. The other thing is your brother's a landlord. I'm going to imagine that that's a decent portion of his income. Small single-family home landlords are in trouble right now. There's recent articles that are coming out that they just had to have a crackdown. They changed some laws because giant mega corporations have been buying up single-family homes and becoming mass landlords. It's easy. It's easy money for them. The problem is there's a big difference between a giant corporation based out of New York owning your house in Iowa than your brother who's a local landlord where if my faucet breaks, hey, I need help. Yeah. And that's somebody local to you. I think having the local landlord is really important for those people who are renting, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think you like working with the corporate landlord.
No, they're awful.
So that's already a problem. Imagine how much better off your brother can be in a world where all of his renters have more money to throw around.
Yeah, they wouldn't be missing rent and screwing him.
Bingo. Because every small time landlord right now, that's part of the problem is people are so pinched and so broke that they can't rely on that rent check coming every month. And that's terrifying when you've got a mortgage on your couple of properties.
And you got to now something happens, you got to sell your house, and who's buying your house? The corporation.
Mm-hmm. And you've got to make a move. That's how these things happen.
And it all funnels to the top.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Let me ask this. For every one of my brother, if my brother's in the top 20%, then there's 4 people to my brother. And those 4 people get $1,000, and my brother gets $1,000. Well, that's $5,000 total, and my brother got $1,000 of it, and the other 4 people got the other $4,000. Well, sure. if you cancel it out, that's an extra $3,000. That's, he would argue, where's that other $3,000 come from? Like one person gets $1,000, I get $1,000, perfect, we're even. But if $3,000 more come to somebody else, does that extra $3,000 come out of my taxes too? So I'm not actually getting $1,000, I'm actually losing, $1,000 a month or $800 a month.
So I want to linger on the value-added tax for a second, just so everybody can understand and plant a flag where everybody can see it, right?
Okay.
The idea is tax money when profit is earned, right? It's kind of a sales tax, but it's on a sales tax even on business-to-business transactions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, number one, the percentage would be flat across the whole economy. And if you think this sounds far-fetched, there are a number of European countries that already have a value-added tax, some of them at 20%.
Wow.
I think Germany does. Which also, the question of if you put this tax in, wouldn't people just leave the country and take their money elsewhere? Well, there's still tons of billionaires doing business in Denmark and Sweden, and Sweden actually has more billionaires per capita than the United States, despite having effectively a 51% effective tax rate on the average person. So they pay way higher in taxes, and they have more billionaires.
why do they? You could say like, yeah, well, there's the retort. Why are they there though? Like, is it just because they're patriotic? They like the country, they want to stay there, or?
It turns out when you have a good economy that works for everyone, not just a small group of people. Like, quite frankly, billionaires are stupid. They're literally destroying the thing they think they're trying to save. Most of them have wildly large egos. We've all seen it from the Musks and the Bezoses of the world, right? Like, they think they're doing something great. Ask yourself a question. Drive around and just look around at the country and, like, really take a step back and be like, am I happy with this? Am I proud of this? Is this the kind of country I want to live in? Crumbling downtown buildings, abandoned structures, dead malls, dying retail spaces, office spaces empty, going downhill, not being well kept. And then the only businesses you drive by that look really nice are financial institutions and insurance companies. Like, we're creating this system where finance is the whole business. And everything else that has to do with raw goods and real things is struggling. Retail is struggling. Manufacturing is struggling, right? Like, all these sectors of the economy are doing terrible. Finance is always fine. Finance never loses. And that's a problem. That's the least actually productive thing we do, is finance companies, right? They don't produce anything. They don't make anything. They don't make our material lives better. They don't create very many jobs. It's just a way to make money on money. And that's true of insurance. That's true of, finance companies. That's true of banks. You could go down the list. Investment agencies.
Is it bad? Have you ever read the book, The Richest Man in Babylon?
No, I think that was one that I did I read a synopsis of, but hit me.
If you're ever in any sales, you're in sales, and I think that's probably where you've heard of it.
Yeah.
It's a book generally about building wealth, and in it talks about of when you get paid money. Let's say, I'm going to butcher this right now, but there's a story in there. A man builds a well, and he spends 10,000 gold shillings or whatever money they were in Babylon at that point on that well. And now he makes money because that well, or it was a mill, a mill. He makes money now because that mill adds value to all the people. So therefore he should profit off that mill. It grinds grain for people. It produces something. And that's like his incentive. And I guess that's kind of capitalism 101. But, right. And now he has money, and he's like, I can go invest in this. That's what it was. A guy was wanting to build a mill, and he asked his friend for money. And he says, I need you to give me money so I can build this mill, and then in return, I'll give you all that money back plus more. And that was his rich friend making money on money.
Yeah.
And I think we can paint making money on money as a bad thing. Like, oh, you're adding zero value. But the fact that guy could give money to this guy, in a way, money is a form of force in the economy that you can put towards something to make something happen. And then you get more money back because of it. And that's what the stock market does with a few extra steps is I put my money into these companies, and then I give them the power to do something because now they have funds. And then once they do something, they give the funds back to me in profit or lack thereof. And that's what insurance companies do with the profit they make. Or
Absolutely.
Not the profit, but the actual money they get, they invest it. So is it, when you put it that way, is it actually bad to make money on money? Because when you put it in the market, you're not just turning it into more money. You're giving people the ability to do things.
The only reason why it's bad is because where does that money eventually end up? And we're in a situation where it's never the worker's hands. We're fundamentally separated from the means of production. The moment factory work came into play, it used to be kind of the situation like you're talking about, where a guy owned a mill, right? Mm-hmm. And he owned all of the means of production and got the fruits of that labor. It's not really like that now. You know, if you work in a shoe factory, your job is you poke the lace hole. You don't own any part of this, and you're at the mercy of whatever labor is dictated by the guy who says he owns all of it. He owns the entire means of production, every part of it, and your labor has to go to him. And he gets to dictate the price of this labor. He gets to dictate everything from top to bottom, including what profit he makes on the shoe at the end of the process. And so that's the problem, is because modern industrialization has separated us from the means of production. It is a pipe dream to think that any normal person can just, like, good luck starting a business in 2024. Like, it is the
without
riskiest,
privilege.
You're correct. Like,
Yeah.
It's the riskiest, most dangerous thing that you will do. You will almost certainly lose more than you make. You are literally probably better off walking into a casino and betting it all on black at the roulette table.
Yeah.
That's a problem. It shouldn't be like that. And it's because
I always think it's funny when people say, they show a picture of here's what success looks like. And it shows a road of up, down, up, down, up, down. And then at the end, it's like way up. And they're like, don't get caught up in this up and down, because it took all this up and down to get to the way up here. And this is what you'll see with companies. But when you realize that 90% of people can't afford one down, that leaves only the people who have a ton of money in their pocket to afford the ups and downs to get to that point where it takes off.
Yep. Yeah, we've got to.
And how entrepreneurial. People argue, well, if you gave money to people, they wouldn't become entrepreneurial. Dude, how entrepreneurial can you be when you can't afford anything? When you can't afford a single downturn. That's very anti-entrepreneurial, if you ask me.
First thing I would do is entrepreneurial. Like, and that's a lot of people. There's a lot of people who have the thing they want to do that currently feel like they can't do it. We have actually crushed the entrepreneurial spirit because of the way modern economics is running.
Yeah.
We've never produced less innovation. We've never produced less genuinely new things as we do right now. We have a lot of novelties.
Go ahead.
We have a lot of novelties. It's not real innovation. We're not making like real progress.
No. How many people graduate high school and their first like baseline instinct is, I need to go to college so someone can give me a job, not so I can start a business for my family or build wealth or anything. It's like, I need to go. Someone needs to go provide me something for me. Yeah. You know? There's no chance I'm going to start something. I need to get it from somebody else who's going to give me something.
And so that's the other. When I made that argument earlier that you're kind of like forced into submission, a lot of people are like, no, you're not. You can go work for yourself. There's this famous debate between Carl Wiederchrist and Orrin Cass, and Orrin Cass is arguing the more conservative libertarian economics Ayn Rand kind of thought, and that's what he says. He's like, you can go work for yourself, and it's like, even the idea of working for yourself is an illusion, because what you mean by that is start a business where you still have to go to people with more access to resources and wealth than you currently have, and trade something that you can do to them to get that back. You're starting from zero. And that's like ultimately the problem. We got to quit with the starting from zero. Who said? Why did we ever decide that the starting point is destitution? Does that ever make sense? You wouldn't treat your kids that way. Why is it okay to treat everybody else in society that way?
What do you mean the starting point is destitution?
The starting point is, for every single citizen, is zero. You start with no money, no wealth, no startup, and you have to start from scratch. And the idea that we're going to have more innovation in that situation where everybody starts with absolutely no floor underneath of them is ludicrous. That's never going to work, right? Most of the innovation happened when people in our country, when people could literally drive out west, put 4 stakes in the ground and be like, yeah, this looks good. We'll do something here. Like, people were just claiming land at that time. And, like, that's when innovation and, you know, the wealth boom of the United States, like, first happened, is when literally it was almost that easy. And ever since, now that everything's owned, all property, like, there is no place where you can just go start something from scratch. You have to start by asking others to share their resources with you, typically with a labor trade.
So I'd ask you this. A lot of people will say that I have what I have because that's fair. I work for it. I have it. It's mine. And it's just, it would be unfair for you to take it away from me.
I'm arguing to give you more.
Yeah.
I'm not, like, and that's the thing is.
What did you tell me about that one time, about the person who wakes up on the island?
So, yeah, more or less what our economy is kind of like. This is the best analogy I've heard for it. It's almost like there's a guy on an island and he's there for the first 10 years of his life, right? And, like, his adult life, we'll say. And he's by himself, and so he works really hard. He gathers all the coconuts. He creates a way to repeatedly fish. He creates a sustainable life, builds a homestead, finds a plot of land. And he thinks he's alone. And for 10 years he is. And so he works really hard for all that stuff. And then a second person lands on the island and comes along. And, you know, all right, I'm hungry. Here's a coconut. Grabs it out of the tree. And the first guy sees him. Hey. That's my coconut. I was here first. I own all this land. If you want that, you've got to work for me. Most of us can easily recognize that that's not really a justified situation, but that's more or less how our economy works. We're more or less telling people everything's already owned, and if you want any of this stuff, you've got to get it from the people who already own it. Why do they own it? Because they were there first? Because their daddy owned it? It's not really clear to anybody on the outside. They don't have any real justification. Now, it does get complicated if you take that further. Because it's like, well, what exactly does he owe this other person?
I think you also mentioned, like, it was also in terms of paying people things, is like, hey, I need this coconut, like, I'll work for you. And whatever that person says that they'll pay them, they have to take as well.
Yeah, exactly. And for a total stranger, some people will look me dead in the face when I make that analogy, and they'll be like, I don't see what's wrong with that. The analogy flips when you make it a human being that you care about. Because if I tell you that that's your sister, what do you think you should give your sister to make sure that she can get by on this island?
You would probably say, I'd share with my sister. I would share more. Like, the island would be ours together.
Bingo. Because it is. We have to see all of ourselves as brother and sister sharing the resources of this planet. It's us against the planet. It's not us against each other. But that's what capitalism has done to us. It pits us against each other. You know, iron versus iron. It is a sword fight of who can exploit the other one the most, because fundamentally that's exploitative. You don't have a justified property claim to all of that land on the island. You just got lucky.
Yeah, just because you were born first doesn't mean that.
Bingo.
It just came down to a dice roll.
Kids inherently understand this problem. You know, I to try and change my parents' minds one day, which is a very difficult task, I explained it through my kids. I said, I asked the three of them, you know, for context, at the time, I think they were 10, 8, and 7. All girls, right? And so I said, so let's say I made dinner tonight, but then I put it in this Tupperware, and I blindfolded y'all, and then I went and I buried it somewhere back in the backyard. And I buried it, like, so good that you couldn't, like, tell where I buried it. So you had to go from scratch and go start digging and try and find dinner. Who do you guys think would find it first? And they all knew. Probably Auden. She's the oldest. Of course. And I was like, why do you think that? And they're like, well, she's bigger, faster, stronger than us, right? She'll get to it quicker. Okay. I was like, so let's say she does that. I was like, do you think that she would then be able to tell you, well, since I found it first, this is my dinner, and now if you guys want some of this dinner, you have to work for me. You have to do something for me to be able to get some of it. And they're like, no, she should share. And it's exactly that. It's exactly that. At some point, capitalism kills our very well-tuned ethical brain that knows the difference of right and wrong in this case, and thinks that because we put it in the context of money and because we put it in the context of adult jobs, that suddenly we can justify this kind of injustice.
I think that example you used is the real killer of the idea that privilege is a right.
Right.
I was born healthy, strong, smarter than you, and therefore I get to conquer you in a way financially. And it's a very unhumanistic view.
Yeah. And that's what I would say to the people who are self-made. Look, I'm not trying to... There are a few of them out there that are legitimately self-made, that did work really hard, that continue to work really hard, that put a lot of stuff into their business. And that's all still fair. All I'm saying is you should have to pay the people who helped you get there a fair wage and share some of the profits of that hard work with the people around you. And it's reasonable. We're not talking about completely destroying things that people have built. It could have some radical effects. If you did everything that I suggested in this conversation, it could have some radical effects. Like, for one, my guess is we probably collectively agree that iPhones shouldn't exist if they're requiring 8-year-olds to make them.
Right.
Like, it shouldn't have to be that way. We want to live in a world and create incentives in the world that make it so that we can get the nice things that we want, we can live comfortably, but it should never come at the expense of what it currently does, which is a toxic environment, child labor. We could go down the list.
I think even the most staunch capitalist cannot justify saying that iPhones are ethically made or Nike shoes are ethically made.
Or chocolate.
Or chocolate. And
child labor is in so many of our products.
I find that sometimes when people will argue against this, they'll be like, well, you use an iPhone, don't you? And I'm like, I do. And because the world forces me to, you can't live the day without a phone. You can't do, it's like trying to live in 13th century England without a plow.
Yeah.
Yep.
You're one individual making any kind of choices to not participate is not going to make these kinds of changes. We have to collectively use our social power to agree that there are just certain things we should not do.
Mm-hmm. Bringing that in, when you say that a self-made person should pay the people who helped him get there a livable wage, he'd say, well, I couldn't. I don't have enough money to give him that, especially when I was making myself self-made. And if I did that, I wouldn't be self-made. I'd be broke. And everybody collectively says the same thing about themselves.
Yeah, they do.
Because truly not one person can make the first step, or else they'll get their head cut off. How do we move forward without chopping a ton of heads?
So 2 things. One, is the type of work and the type of industry that you've created or invented actually something that we needed, benefits us, or something that we should have a labor market in? So that's like the first question we have to ask. Everyone was fine before Jeff Bezos opened up his garage and started selling books, sending them in boxes out of his garage. Everyone was fine. Mm-hmm. And so it was like, oh, well, if you took it, I couldn't pay all of my workers a fair wage. Well, maybe it's because the actual thing that you're doing isn't worth doing. It only became worth doing in this race to the bottom hyper-capitalistic economy that we've created since the 1940s. And so that's the thing that would have to settle out. The thing that would have to settle out is if we started giving checks to everybody. There's probably a lot of things that aren't self-sustainable. There's probably a lot of products and a lot of companies and a lot of businesses right now. And let's be honest, most work that we do is busy work for rich people. It's like half our economy.
So
it's people that, that's what a service economy is. A service economy is, here's busy work that I don't want to do myself, so I will pay someone at a lower wage to go do it for me. That's everything from waiting tables to, right, to like that, all the service economy. Now, there are parts of the service economy that is absolutely necessary. Things that require training, things that require skill, manufacturing, repair, like those are still technically like service economy things, right? There are things, I don't know how to fix 90% of things on a car. I want someone who knows what the hell they're doing to fix my car. I don't want to go do that. And so it's the meaningless service economy jobs that are problematic. And they're just in existence because someone simply has enough money to pay people to do something for them. So one obvious example of this that just like really contrasts this. We have people who own lots to park your toys. Like, their whole thing they make money on is, I have this plot of grass that I own, and you don't have enough room for your RV or boat or motorcycle, or whatever it is. And so I'm going to build a small little outside structure for you to come put that in. How is that adding value? How is that doing anything for anybody? Like, it is not something that, again, collectively, if we were all more collectively tied to the economy, we would probably agree. Either the person should just have enough place to put the damn boat on their own property or put the, RV on their own property. Maybe there's something amiss here. And that's a highly profitable business. You don't have to do anything. You barely have to maintain the grass. People just come park their stuff and you make money. It's that simple. And that's one example among thousands. If you just take time to really think about, if you look at every business you interact with over the next week, and that's what I would challenge the audience to do, is like, go think about, is this a necessary part of the economic system, or is this just busy work that somebody else just happens to have enough money to be able to pay for?
I think the RV lot is a very I landed on the island first example, because there's not much you have to do, and you get to profit immensely just because you got the land first, or you had enough money to buy the land, which is in an extension of, it is just a farther extension of I got the land / money first. And I was just talking about that the other day. If you look at lot rent for an RV, it's just about as much as renting a 1-bedroom apartment per month. And I think that's so funny for a plot of land that lacks no building, no structure on it, like virtually none. All it has is electric hookup and sewer. Okay, sure. But zero building and construction charges just as much as one that has entire building, construction, amenities, furnishings, internet, everything. It's nuts. It's
but
unreal.
People have the money, so they'll pay it.
Exactly.
It'll get paid because people simply have the money. There's just enough of those people to throw money at this thing.
Capitalism, a capitalist would argue that the price of the lot should go down because people will compete with each other. But that hasn't
rich people
happened.
don't have to. Yeah, because rich people don't have to. That kind of competition happens in middle and normal America, and it doesn't happen in the frivolous extra things of life. And maybe that's fine. If we can play capitalism with the excesses of life, I'm all for it. All I'm saying is, let's draw a line in the sand where we say this basic needs, this is off the table. You don't get to profit off of someone's lack of access to basic needs.
Okay.
That's all.
What would be your first step in getting towards this better vision?
Yeah, I think the first move is simultaneously creating the value-added tax and the basic income, because they can go hand in hand and it can completely pay for it based on how the economy currently works. And then we can say, do we need to go further in terms of clawing back wealth from those who have already gotten abundantly more? And we could do that through the land tax. You know, I would be in favor of like a one-time wealth tax.
How so?
Like, the problem with wealth tax is every time it gets proposed, it's the idea that it would go on and on and on forever. And like the math of that is eventually you just have no wealth left.
Okay.
Like it doesn't end in a terminus. I remember this really funny interview with Bill Gates where he was complaining about the wealth tax, and he's like, I've probably paid about $10 billion in taxes over the course of my life. And he's like, now you could say it probably should have been more, right? Okay, maybe it should have been 20. But with Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax, you know, in 30 years, I would end up paying more money than I have.
Yeah.
We got to avoid that kind of a situation. But I think that if you created a one-time, like, 20% wealth tax is a big chunk of upfront money to, like, claw back and stimulate the economy, it's something that I think that everyone could wrap their head around, and it could kick something like this off. And it's like, now from here, we'll play more fair. Now from here, we'll put people on a more level playing field.
I think people, when you say a one-time wealth tax to stimulate the economy, I think those words bring up in people's minds stimulus checks. And I could be wrong here, but I feel like people think of stimulus checks as a failed thing. And my opinion of why it could be failed is because people knew it was this new thing that's probably happening once. I'm going to be very, very scared. I'm going to act as if it's a scarce product, and I'm going to be careful what I do with it. I'm not going to go and spend it all quickly because I need it.
Right.
But if people knew that $1,000 was coming every month, then they'd be... It's the same way as the person who has a W-2 job is more willing to go paycheck to paycheck than a person who works 1099, because they know more money's coming next month, and they feel like they can go spend it.
2 follow-up questions immediately come to mind.
Yes.
It's, okay, let me just put you in this world where up front, everybody's going to get a quick, like, first month double payment of $4,000, and then after that, everyone's getting $2,000 a month. We're tipping the scales back. We're trying to put everybody on a level playing field. This is your fair payment for being a member of the wealthiest economy on earth. Okay. Do you quit your job? Do you leave your spouse? Do you, like, there are so many people who are in a situation right now where they stay in exploitative situation, whether that be relationships or employer-employee relationships, because they don't have a better alternative. So I think this would be massively disruptive, but that's what I mean when I say, like, this infects us everywhere. How much of domestic violence is caused by financial distress? One is wired to think quite a lot. Number one, because when someone becomes dangerous, if you are financially dependent on them, you make this calculation where, is the danger worth it? No one should ever have to make that calculation.
What you're saying, Johnny, is domestic violence pays the bills.
Clip that, baby.
Oh, God. No, that's
Cancel me,
so
Twitter.
True. Go ahead.
Well, so then the next question is, what would you do? Do you have a product, an idea, or a thing that you would like to do that if you knew that everyone around you had their basic needs met, you might actually be able to market and sell it to them? Something that they value, something that they want. And then immediately, almost everybody has a thing that they would like to do come to mind. For some people, it's art. For some people, it's a different kind of job that they've never been able to do because it's not financially feasible. Like for me, I would love to do actually become a licensed therapist. A lot of people rely on me for that kind of life advice, but I would want to get the education and prove that I am, a person that should be doing that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And help people with their mental health. I would do this immediately, and I would try to market and sell that to other people. And so I think everybody has that thing that they would rather do that they know is a benefit to the people around them. There are so many people who want to be a caregiver of a loved one right now who can't do it,
but
because they would be bankrupt.
All those things, the number one thing that comes to my mind when you say that stuff, Johnny, is all those things you mentioned, like, for lack of a better term, don't increase the GDP. And
yeah,
as
damn straight.
As cold-hearted as that sounds, when you put in the math of, I want to give more money to people so they can stop doing things that create GDP in order to do things that don't create GDP, now we have a problem. Would you agree?
No.
Okay. Help me out then. Because if 40% of our population stopped doing GDP-related things that are hard and suck and we need them to do it, what would happen?
Because there's also that percentage of our population that those things that are hard and suck and are really important to the GDP, they're now going to have to offer better wages and fairer working compensation for the people who are willing to do it. If you want to be a logger don't pay enough for how dangerous of a job it is. It just doesn't. I mean, that is a dangerous job. People die every day logging in the United States. And so,
at the end of the day, is the money for loggers to be paid more going to have to come from the top 10% through taxing their profits more?
Yeah. Yeah, of course it is.
Okay.
Of course it is. And maybe we'll also live in a future where we don't need nearly as many logs either. Like, because this is what I mean. So much of our environmental problems are because we just do wasteful things. We do wasteful things because right now there's nothing stopping you. You don't have to pause and go, can I really afford the labor for this? Can I make this worth people's while? Is this thing that I'm building or doing even going to be worth something that people would actually care about or want? Like, there's so many things that are just wasteful. We have a perishable mindset. Like, get paper plates. Why? It's easier to clean, do all these things. Like, incredibly wasteful things.
Mm-hmm. And we do that because we don't have time to be at home. We don't want to do dishes because we get home from working 60 hours a week and it sucks. And we just want to throw things away and be wasteful. I think a lot of our logic here is relying on domino effects.
Right.
This improves here. The incentive to be wasteful is removed, so therefore logging isn't as dangerous because not a lot as much logs are needed. Yada yada yada. Work hours are decreased, therefore mistakes in the workplace are also decreased because people are less tired. It's a long list of domino effects that happens from making people who feel like they might die next week because they can't pay their bills able to actually pay their bills. And the reverberative effects of that, the reverberations, go down the domino line. It's kind of a reverse trickle-down effect from bottom up instead of top to the bottom.
Dude, you have no idea how funny it is you just said that, because literally Andrew Yang called it the trickle-up economy.
Interesting. But that's so true. And
yeah.
I think it would be really helpful for us. We could do this another episode and prepare for it. But if we created a kind of a flow chart that demonstrated as a visual how things domino up and trickle up. And it probably, dude, Andrew Yang has probably done this already, honestly. But you know that you say that,
it's not in the books. I can tell you that. I've read his books. It's not in his books. But
interesting. I think that would be really helpful for people because people, even I struggle with this because this is a complicated topic. But I struggle even when you say like we should just give people money, and then they'll get to be able to do art. Like so many sirens go off in my head of like, oh my God, we're gonna go broke. People are gonna be.
The thing is they're not just gonna do art. The point is nobody wants to just do one thing. But that's what economics has dictated. Go to your stupid fucking office every single day, doing the same stupid work all the time, listening to Barbara's stupid stories and getting Jim off your back before he comes down and complains about that report you forgot to send. Mm-hmm. And it's that everyday mind-numbing crap that, like, we don't like. It's why people are like, I got to get out. I got to try variety and get something else in your life. And what we're saying is, realistically, half or maybe even a little less than half of the time you're currently spending doing that stuff is how much you should be spending. And you should have way more time, energy, and freedom. And if you want to spend more hours doing that stuff, I mean, there are some things that just require more hours and dedication. Doctors probably should work more often so that there's not a shortage of supply and all of those things. But they should be highly incentivized to do that with massive increases over the UBI, right? No one's wanting to take away high-paying jobs. We're trying to raise the floor on everything else. That's the idea.
Let's talk about this. I think it's easy to talk about like the immediate costs of what it would cost to do this. But how about what are some of the trickle up? What are the immediate things that would be changing? Let's say right now, today, everyone collectively agreed we're going to pay people $1,000 or $2,000 a month. And people's needs are met. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
We've redistributed wealth. We put in a value-added tax. What are some of the first effects we're going to be seeing?
Immediate job creation.
I'm sorry, I should say this. What are we going to be saving money on by what bad things are we going to be eliminating out of society that we're going to be saving money on because we're not addressing these bad things in society that predatory capitalism is creating?
Hanging on to wasteful, old, environmentally negative things like old cars, like appliances in our house that need replaced. Those are some of the big immediate ones that a lot
those
of people
cost a lot of money.
To do.
Yep,
they do. They cost a lot of money, and people are scared to do it. By golly, home insurance right, like home ownership rates are insane right now. It's 7.1. 7.1, even with a perfect 800 credit score. Mm-hmm. You want to lock yourself into a friggin' 30-year mortgage at 7.1? Buckle up.
Yeah.
So you will literally not have equity until 15 years into that loan.
I feel like a good example here of that is the poor man must buy the boots that wear out every 2 weeks, while the rich man can buy boots that last 4 months. That's an immediate example of something you'd save money on. Not just boots in general, but there's so many things that can take that example.
We would just do more cost-effective things everywhere in our lives. Like we know, here's another thing. Mm-hmm. The dollar stores probably start to slowly go out of business. We want the dollar stores to go out of business. Like the dollar stores are like the worst thing in our entire economy. Uh-huh. They are an example of capitalism run amok and taking it to the last dollar because it has the appearance of being cheaper, but actually almost everything in there costs you more money.
Yeah.
And so it's fake cheap. It's not real, except there are 30,000 more locations of dollar stores than there are of Walmarts. Like, it's
the example of predating upon people who must buy cheap items that have to be replaced because they can't afford to buy 10 times the price that will last forever.
Yep. We'll all be more careful, more cautious with our money. We'll be more environmentally conscious. So those are some of the really big, like, immediate impacts. Also, immediate job creation.
Okay.
Immediate job creation. There's so many people who would start moving money around in the economy that you would have this boom, exactly like we had during the stimulus. Except now we won't have COVID shutting down a sector of the economy. So instead of jobs kind of staying stagnant, which is what they did during COVID, right? We all got these checks, and then it kind of like tapered off the big like fall in, the big like spike in unemployment rate. Like more people would want to do more different kinds of jobs immediately.
Interesting.
And that's the economic effects. The human effects are so, I can't overstate this.
What do you mean human effects are what we should be looking for, dude? Is it caring about people?
I know.
Is that like, no, dude, the point of life is to raise the GDP and die, okay?
I almost tear up sometimes thinking about if we could just get this one thing done, the amount of kids that would have access to a better meal tonight, and the amount of women that would be free from a domestic abuse situation that they're currently captive in. And I know I'm not the only one who knows somebody personally who would immediately be able to get out of a bad situation. There is someone you know probably in your life who might be silently struggling with abuse that you don't even get to see, that has no way out because economically, you know, they're in a bad situation. Being a single mother is the fastest way to ruin your life. So they're in that situation, and just the amount of human equality that we could create in one day with this is really breathtaking when you take it all in, and long overdue, quite frankly. And I sometimes get, I have to sometimes like watch myself, because like my reaction is I already know all this. Like I've read the books. I had my mind changed. I used to be a, dyed in the wool, hardcore Ayn Rand libertarian, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. People have to go work hard. Like I had that perspective, and it's hard for me now to even put myself back in a situation where I thought that way. And all I would tell you is if this sounds like a pipe dream, please, for once in your life, read a book from a different perspective of someone else who disagrees with you, because it took one for me. And then I needed to read 5 more. I read just The War on Normal People by Andrew Yang, and I went, holy shit, this entire picture of this whole situation is entirely different than what I've been told my entire life.
Wow. That's, right on the head, Johnny.
That's a wrap, I think.
That's a good one, dude. That's so many people, if they were just exposed to one book.
Yeah.
And not the Bible. Yeah.
Just a different perspective than your own. It was unbelievable how much I was like, man, no one ever told me any of this.
It's not even talked about.
Yeah.
It's you and I both came to the same thing when we were both staunch Christians, and we read one book. And it's like, these are things that we were never told, never talked about. And it's not just things of God is mean, so how could he be real? It's like, oh my God, this is it's more than that, And
on that point, like, not enough credit goes to both Dawkins and Hitchens for picking the right things to talk about in their books. Because there's so many things that you could say and that you could talk about. But, like, the idea that there were still active wars going on in the name of religion in the late 20th century in modern day Ireland was like, it just like this idea that like religion is this giant peace creator crumbled before my eyes. And at the very least, it made me move off of organized religion. And it was because I read one book with a different perspective. And it's not to go try to change your mind about your core foundational beliefs. It's just, you're guaranteed to be missing something. Like right now, if you've only ever stayed in your bubble, in your circle, in your information, you're guaranteed to be missing something.
Yeah. What would the effects be if everybody in Ireland at that moment, and everybody in, Northern England and Ireland read those books? Just one book by Hitchens, Dawkins. You just pick the roulette wheel and give them one. Yeah. How would they all wake up the next day and be like, man, we should go blow someone up? How is that possible? Yeah. It wouldn't be. And the fact that people would rather live their entire life struggling for an idea instead of just taking the chance of reading in one book is unreal.
It's unfortunate that, again, effects of capitalism. Let's just go back to one. If people had more time in their day,
yes,
self-education is one of the things that they would feel like they actually could do. And it's so valuable. It's so valuable. It's so enriching for your life and seeing new perspectives. I mean, it's my favorite thing. I can't stop learning. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, dude. I was joking about earlier, like the idea of the point of life is to raise GDP and die. As much as that's silly, it's also, I don't want to peer away from the fact that GDP is necessary. At the end of the day, you are providing value, which puts food on the table so we can survive. And painting art pictures doesn't make us survive. However, let's think about this. That person who's in a domestically violent situation, who can't leave because of economic reasons, how useful are they to the economy? How? And how much more useful could they be? I mean, how useful is a depressed person for making their own damn meals? Very little. How much better are you at everything in life, which includes adding value to the economy, when you have a better mindset, a happier mood, and a good purpose and outlook on life?
I laughed because it immediately reminded me of this really funny story about me and Andrew. So I went to an event. I went to this
first name basis.
Yeah, him and I are cool. Andrew, if you're watching, we want to get you on.
That's so
cool. So we do this event out in Iowa City, and basically the event what I'm told is like, hey, you're going to get in a car with some people from the campaign. We're going to drive 2 hours, and then Andrew's going to sit down. We're going to have like a panel, and we want you to kind of be like somebody that Andrew talks to on this panel about rising healthcare costs, and like kind of talk about your story. Because my story was having $200,000 in medical debt by the time I was 30 years old. And being bankrupt because of it. And also not being able to afford like my CPAP supplies. I have obstructive sleep apnea. It's a potentially life destroying condition if it's not treated. Mm-hmm. And so in part of that panel, I sit down, I'm telling my story. My story is about 8 minutes. People can go look this up on YouTube. It probably wouldn't be that hard to find. Hopefully I've lost weight since then. It was a few years back, but I was sitting down and I explained to him like my CPAP machine with insurance, right? With insurance was still $1,500. This thing that I need to live every night to help lower my risk of heart attack and death. And he was like, the other thing in when he kind of like talked after me and he was talking to the crowd, doing his usual crowd work as politicians do. And he was like, another thing people don't think about is like, think about Alex's wakefulness at work. Like, how productive can he really be if we don't treat this? right? This is like, people think about, oh, there's a drain on the economy. No, we should pay for this kind of equipment. If it helps somebody be more awake, he's going to be better and more productive at work. And it literally, like, in that moment, I had like an epiphany in front of the whole crowd where my face was just like, holy shit, I didn't even think about that. like, it was something that wouldn't even occur to me, and I was the one it was happening to you. That's because you're the frog in the boiling pot.
That's so true. At the end of the day, every staunch capitalist has to realize investing in people is the number one investment that you can make in any business. And we do that at a micro level at business. That's such like sales 101. Invest in people and they will give back. Why don't we do that at a national level?
We used to. We just forgot. And we've got to get it back. And like, to your point about like how useful is that woman, you know, with the 2 kids and the abusive situation to the economy. She's actually doing the most important job in our economy that's currently unpaid everywhere, raising the next generation of productive people. And that, creating a better environment where those kids are better treated, better fed, better educated. The stats on this are very clear. Wealthy people without a lot of home distress do really well in school. Poor people with a lot of home distress don't do well in school. It's as clear as any data point we have in social studies.
I think, dude, this is where you can just honestly blast racism out of the water. Like, you can destroy it with this one point, dude. People could say certain groups of people are awful or whatever, and they do all this stuff, but at the end of the day, they do that because they're financially destitute, and any color of any person who's financially destitute does the same exact things at the same rate. And
100%.
At the end of the day, it's not a race problem. It is not this and that. It is these people are in a position and it causes problems. That's just what it is. And if they weren't, then what you'll find is you take that same race of people and you put them in a privileged position. They do just as good as a different race of people in a privileged position to a very competitive amount, you know. It's not, that's what I'm saying. It's like, at the end of the day, dude, it's a financial situation.
I'm not suggesting that a basic income for all would be a substitute for reparations. But boy, would it help the African American community far disproportionately than it would white Americans, because they are currently already so far behind the wealth scale. They're the people who need the help up the most. And so if we could do this one thing, I don't know if reparations will ever be something we could work out or figure out or make sense of it in the future. I'm not even sure if it's the right thing to do or if it makes sense. There's a lot of details there. But here's this one thing that we could do right now that would say, we're sorry we kept you out of the Monopoly game. Here's your buy back in.
Totally, dude. Totally. Dude, that's interesting.
Yeah. And and that is the best explanation, too. I want to highlight this analogy. For Black Americans, what their life is like 3 other people started playing Monopoly. And they've been playing for an hour already, bought up all the properties, accumulated a bunch of money, and now they're going to start you with the $1,500 that they start with and be like, isn't this fair? Of course it's not fair. Yeah. By the way, that's also true for poor white Americans. That's true for poor Americans everywhere. You're playing a rigged game of Monopoly that was rigged against you before you were even born. And you do deserve a few extra passes at go to have your fair shot. It's
so easy. And I know people who are like this. And it's what would be the word? It's enticing even to think like this, because it's such a simple, inflammatory narrative to believe. But to say that, man, these people act like this, they're bad people. But if you compare you could call it the white trash neighborhoods to the ghettos, it's no different. It's no different.
In some cases, it's a lot worse.
Yeah, but it's the same cause, dude.
Yeah.
It's just lack of opportunity, lack of money, and dude, they've been playing Monopoly for 1 minute, and we've been playing for 3 days.
If our show ever gets big, and like this episode gains traction, I want the audience to like send us in a list of just random things in the modern world and be like, is this capitalism? ? Because you'd be amazed how many things, like we talked about it, right? Toxins in the atmosphere. It's because unchecked capitalism means the company that makes the product, the rubber product, doesn't care, so they just dump shit in the river, right? Same thing with like, you know, our water treatment systems. They don't have to be good. It's why Boeing is blowing doors off of planes right now. You go down the list of everything in life that is a noteworthy news story, and like, is this a problem of capitalism? And the amount of things that I could answer, well, it didn't help to, right, is so long. And you know, it'd be fun to like go through that list.
Dude, we should play that game sometime.
Yeah.
We should do ChatGPT. ChatGPT, give me a list of the top 100 problems in America right now. And then we just go down the list and say, is this capitalism?
Yeah.
Is this capitalism?
Dude, who needs an audience? You've got the answer.
Dude. That's nuts.
It's breathtaking. And once you start to see the world this way, it makes you really motivated to help others see it this way, because it's really all it would take to change it. Is if we all got on the same page about this. You know, I'm very encouraged by what happened with Andrew Yang. No, he didn't become president, but he did like completely blow people away with being a complete unknown and actually competing in that presidential race. And it's because of him that we ever got a check. Like, the government sending checks to everyone is never going to be a thing until a guy convinces everybody that the government can, in fact, send large numbers of checks to large numbers of people. And he moved the Overton window on that so perfectly that now the majority of people have at least heard of UBI as a concept. You might not agree with it yet. You might not think it's something that we should do or would do. And the thing is the answer whether or not we should do it is an ethical question. It's got nothing to do with economics. The economics are there, and we can make sense of it. We have the money. Our economy's friggin' massive. People have a ton of wealth. We can find it somewhere. We've got to convince people that this is something we should do. We should make this more fair. We should treat people better. And if we can all agree on that, the world can be a lot better place in short order.
Hell yeah. I love it, dude. Thank you, Johnny, for first changing my opinion on this, and then second, dude, just talking about this and doing the work required to change other people's mind on it too. To having the knowledge, doing the work it takes to get the knowledge to spread to other people.
That's no small task, but you know, I think this is probably one we'll come back to as more things develop in the future, right? So, absolutely. It's been a good talk,
dude. Thank you. I'll let you go. That's the end.
All right, dude. See ya.
Peace.